Hi there. Welcome back to Engage and Empower Me, a patient engagement design course from Stanford University School of Medicine. I'm Dr. Larry Chu, Associate Professor of Anesthesia and Executive Director of Stanford MedX. And along with my co-director, Dr. Kyra Babinet from the Persuasive Technology Lab at Stanford, we'd like to welcome you to today's class, which is the 7th in a series on patient engagement design. We're really fortunate to have with us today e-patient Sarah Kucharski, as well as Dr. Ronnie Zeiger, who is the former Chief Health Strategist of Google and now a co-founder of Smart Patients. And in addition, Gilles Friedman, who is the founder of ACOR, one of the early online cancer communities, who is a co-founder of Smart Patients. And the topic of today's class is leveraging social relationships for patient engagement. So it's an exciting topic, and I really look forward to hearing from our speakers and the discussion. For those of you watching us online, we have a quick message for you, and so we're going to play that message now, and we'll see you back here after the break with Sarah Kucharski. If you are joining us for the first time, a quick reminder that there's a simultaneous conversation happening on Twitter right now using the hashtag MedX. Sarah Kucharski is the moderator of today's class and will be taking questions from social media. So please make sure to start up your Twitter client to join in the online conversation and interact with today's speakers. Christopher Snyder, otherwise known as I Am Spartacus, is moderating the online tweet chat discussion this evening. Just as a reminder, call for abstracts and presenters is now open for Stanford MedX 2014. Don't miss your chance to present at the premier patient-centered conference on emerging technology in medicine. Applications for speakers and presenters are now open until March 1st, 2014. For more information, go to medicinex.stanford.edu and apply today. Please also make sure to like our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/Stanford MedX. Please note, you are watching a live online program and there is a delay between real-time events and the live stream you are watching. Tweets from our in-class guests will appear before you see the real-time events they are tweeting about unfold on the video live stream.
From 1942 to 1945, the U.S. Marines relied on Navajo code talkers to relay secret messages about the war on the Pacific Front. The Navajo language was complex and unwritten. Meanings changed based on syntax, tonal qualities, and regional dialect. In order to translate the language into a workable code, 29 Navajo recruits were brought to Camp Pendleton in Oceanside, California, and tasked with creating a dictionary and words for specific military terms. A seemingly unrelated string of Navajo words their English equivalents created the Marines' secret messages. The code never was broken. Healthcare providers are no stranger to code talking. The ICD-9 tells us that 268.9 is an unspecified vitamin D deficiency, while 728.96 indicates necrotizing fasciitis. Patient summaries may include NKA, no known allergies, PVD, peripheral vascular disease, or FTT, failure to thrive. Such numbers and abbreviations mean little to nothing outside the medical office, but to providers, they are a means to quickly communicate about a patient. But patients are code talkers too. We speak in code to our families, to our medical providers, and to one another. And like the Navajo, our words' meanings undergo subtle changes in context. Consider the word tired. Does it indicate a need to nap or muscles weak from physical exhaustion? Does its meaning include mental fatigue or emotional anguish, frustration, anger, or fear? Does it indicate having given up? Does it mean acceptance of the inevitable? As a patient, it means all those things to me, which is why I have a hard time even saying it. I'm tired. I am tired. The very act of uttering the phrase makes my shoulders droop as if in defeat. To be tired, to admit to being tired, is to admit that the weight of life and what feels like a struggle simply to stay alive is a burden I need help to carry. I'm tired. It's also what I say when I don't feel like saying anything else, when the full litany of ailments and aches, work and personal demands is just too much to explain. It's what I say when I want to be left alone, when I'd rather allow the assumption that it's nothing more than a late night or an early morning that's gotten me down. But my fellow patients know my code. They know it because while our illnesses, procedures, and medications may not be the same, we still have shared experiences. And these unifying experiences are what give us empathy to understand the meanings that lie below the surface. My fellow patients are anything but impartial, objective observers in this experiment of life. Their subjective view has been informed not only by textbooks and statistics, medical journals, and clinical trials, but by the brutal truth of living with disease. Some may thrive and some may die. But if you listen closely, they are telling you how much words like A1C and metastases can really mean. Doctors, you must not only hear your patient's words, but listen for their context. When the father of 4 with a cardiac history makes an excuse and says he's been busy, ask him about his life's priorities. Your non-compliant patient may lack the support he needs at home to make serious changes. When the teenager with Crohn's disease isn't following through with medication management, ask her about coping with an invisible illness in a social environment. And patients, work with your doctors to translate your needs and theirs. Help them provide their best level of care, as they cannot treat what you do not disclose. Understand that you, as the sole occupant of your body and your life, are therefore your own best advocate. Together, we have the knowledge and experience to break one another's secret codes and instead learn to speak the language of compassion. One's health is defined by more than tests and measurements. It is a complex series of sociological, psychological, and physiological factors to understand. Health substantiates our being as creatures made whole through treatment of body, mind, and soul. Thank you. So with that, I would like to introduce our other guests tonight. We have with us Ronnie Zeiger and Gilles Friedman. Ronnie earned his MD from Stanford University and completed his internal medicine residency at UCSF. He is a former chief health strategist at Google. In 2012, he and Gilles founded Smart Patients in order to amplify the knowledge created by networks of engaged patients. Ronnie currently serves as CEO of Smart Patients and continues to treat patients as a community staff physician at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center. As one of the original members of the e-patient working group, Gilles is co-founder and past president of the Society for Participatory Medicine. In 1999, he founded the Association of Cancer Online Resources, also known as ACOR, the largest online social network for cancer patients. He is co-founder of Smart Patients with Ronnie, and he continues to be a pioneer of online medical communities. We'll be hearing from them right after this break from Medicine X. Thank you.
time to take another shout out to Twitter. If you're following this conversation online or on Twitter, Christopher Snyder, otherwise known as I'm Spartacus, is moderating the Twitter discussion on the MedX hashtag. If you're just joining us, we have with us today Dr. Ronnie Zeiger and Gilles Friedman from Smart Patients, speaking with us today on the topic of leveraging social relationships in patient engagement. E-patients and caregivers out there, what questions do you have for our speakers today? What might you like to ask Dr. Zeiger and Mr. Friedman about peer-to-peer healthcare? Healthcare technologists, providers, and researchers out there, what are the real-world problems you are facing that you think might be addressed through better use of leveraging social relationships for patient engagement? Tweet us your questions or responses, and we'll do our best to have our guest speakers address them during this class at the Stanford University School of Medicine, Engage and Empower Me, for Thursday, February 20th, 2014.
It's wonderful to be here. I'm Ronnie Zeiger, and this is Gilles Friedman. We're going to share some stories about our journeys, both apart and now together, and then look forward to a conversation with you. Smart Patients happens to be the name of our company, the online communities that we build and run. But really, it's with lowercase letters. It's what we're all talking about, and obviously the name wasn't chosen accidentally. And also, what we're talking about, we think and hope, is that this is part of all of us beginning to understand that social and science were never meant to be separate, and there's so much that can be gained as we learn how together they are. So I'll begin a little bit. Gilles and I will go back and forth as we often do in the office, and I'm going to tell you how my path started to intersect with what you all are doing here. So this was it was 1994. And the internet looked a little bit like this. The only thing medical on the internet was that line there about halfway down was a bunch of links that Yahoo had organized under health. Medicine, drugs, diseases, fitness, ... I was actually just a few buildings over as a first-year medical student at Stanford. And the world was becoming a really interesting place. Many of us were learning how to use email. A few of us nerds, myself included, had used it a little bit in college. And we were learning the art and science of medicine as it was being bestowed upon us. And I thought I was on the right path to doing something really interesting that hopefully would help a lot of people. That combined all my nerdy science-ness as well as my interest in applying science to real people. I had previously thought I was going to be a bench guy, but I got lonely looking under the microscope and was delighted to learn that you could do science and people at the same time in clinical medicine. And that's what the world looked like to me. And in particular, the expert was at the center. The physician, in particular the clinician scientist, was at the center, and that's where I was headed towards that central position. Gilles, what were you doing around that time?
So just about the same time you discovered Yahoo, my wife was diagnosed with early stage breast cancer, in fact a very early stage of breast cancer, ductal carcinoma in situ. And we needed to find information. What is less known about my the medical story that brought me to build ACOR is that 6 years prior to her diagnosis of cancer, she had 2 open heart surgeries at the time when the public internet was not available. And I needed to spend 2 weeks in a medical library to read all the medical books about this really complex situation that she had. And because of the work that I did reading about this medical condition, when the first experimental surgery failed and she needed to get a second surgery within a week, the doctors then told me that because I was the bridge between the patients and the doctors, I almost certainly had helped to save her life, because otherwise without me being like the person that connected this really complex medical team and the patient would have refused to go for a second surgery. So 6 years later, she gets diagnosed with early stage breast cancer. And unlike the first case, she was diagnosed by a bad doctor. And thanks to the internet, within 2 hours, I was able to find enough information to call the doctor and said, there'll be no surgery tomorrow, and we're going to go for a second opinion. And the result of that was that my wife never had chemotherapy. She didn't have all kinds of treatment. She didn't, because it was an early stage breast cancer, she didn't need to have a full mastectomy. So we avoided this surgery, plus the long-term side effects of chemotherapy. And just this happened because in 2 hours, I had enough information from a group of patients who just 3 of them knew very specifically the information about this subtype of breast cancer and told me you need to go to 2, there are 2 pathologists that know really how to deal with this in the country, one in San Francisco and one in New York. And thanks to them, my wife never had the treatment that not only would have given her long-term side effects, but was the wrong treatment for a type of cancer. As a result of this, a month later, I started to archive the conversations that were taking place. And 6 months later, there were 9 more groups that decided that they would join the central archives. And then 6 months later, we decided to build a cooperative of online communities for all types of cancer. And it looked, sorry. The first website looked like this unreadable thing, which was considered to be an advanced website at the time.
What you can't see is that there's a few icons in there that would actually be spinning
Yes.
about its horizontal axis, and wow.
Yes. So while those online communities, their numbers exploded, the number of people joining exploded too, and the amount of conversations that were taking place were exploding. At the same time, PubMed became available to anybody, and all of a sudden we all realized that the amount of information that was available was growing exponentially, or it was growing and growing and growing, and it was already pretty clear at the time that it's almost impossible for any human being to be able to follow everything that gets published. Of course, that was in '95. If you look at the numbers now, it has really grown exponentially. I did some research a couple of months ago. If you want to know, if you want to read everything that gets published about lung cancer in a month, you have to read 900 articles, which no one can do. And no one can do a proper assessment of which one of those 900 articles are really valuable clinically.
So as Gilles was figuring out in the mid-late 90s that doctors and scientists can't do it alone, I was coming to a similar understanding. And so we were talking about the most underutilized resource in medicine, which is computers. And so I was starting to get a clue, but I only had one clue, and I needed several more. So fast forward a couple of years, and during my medical school years here and my residency up the street at UCSF, I was transitioning a little bit to my thinking, realizing that neither I or any of my colleagues were going to be able to do all the things that I kind of envisioned the modern clinician and the modern scientist to be able to do. And so I thought that computers were going to be the answer. And a little homage to some projects that I've worked on in the past. I've always been interested in the diagnostic process and differential diagnosis for any of you clinicians or clinicians in training. And I built a couple of tools for them. I didn't choose to put a dinosaur on the top of my first big project. I wanted it to be called something else, and the publisher that I was working with said, "We've got it. It's going to be called Diagnosaurus." and I said, well, I can't say what I said, but I was very happy to see, actually a couple of months ago, they upgraded the dinosaur, so now it's a mean-looking dinosaur. And this is, I put it here a little bit for fun, but also to talk about what many of us with perhaps more, too much training, both in the clinical and science world as well as in the technical world, there is so much opportunity right now at the intersection of the health sciences and what many of us now refer to as big data, and it's very easy to get lost in there. I think I still am, but I'm learning. We've been living in a world now of electronic health records for close to a decade in the mainstream, with related clinical decision support systems, and what all those things mean is a opportunity to let humans do what they're good at and augment them with what computers are good at, and b forget what humans can do when they connect with each other.
Don't change the picture. I thought that you put those up to represent doctors who don't understand that the most underutilized resource of the healthcare system are the patients.
No, the dinosaurs are supposed to be you, Shil. So while I was thinking about those things and taking off my diapers, my early diapers in the field, Gilles was actually getting some real work done.
And so we built ACORE, and within a few years we had about 160 online communities for all kinds of cancers. And at some point we had about 65,000 people and lots of conversations. It became apparent that those conversations were invaluable, and they were also completely hidden. Each one was in a silo. We used software that is listserv, and you create communities that are like really very well defined. You have to join an email address, and if you're not part of that community, you'll never be able to know what are the conversations taking place. And I started paying attention that in different silos, at different times, people were talking about similar things without realizing that other communities were discussing similar topics. And I also, as a witness, paid close attention to remarkable things that many of those patients were doing most of the time without realizing that, in fact, each one of those communities was a network of micro-experts, and you never knew what kind of aggregation you were going to get and what kind of invention was going to come out of each one of those communities. I'll give a couple of examples. We have a community for a rare cancer where people decided they needed to build a centralized tissue bank in order to advance science, because without this centralized tissue bank, no scientist would ever be able to really conduct research. They did this about 10 years ago, and now Stanford is going to run the first phase 1 clinical trial based on some research that was done on this centralized tissue bank. And another example is acceleration of drug development. I mean, very, very fast acceleration with approval of a drug years before the drug company expected, because the patients helped others, many other patients who were usually misdiagnosed with the disease, go back, get the proper diagnosis, and then get into a clinical trial.
So, we're close to where Gilles and I meet. Don't worry, we won't keep you too long. I then, after practicing full-time for a couple years, switched to being a part-time physician, which I still am, and went to take a job at Google, where I started working on patient-facing software instead of doctor-facing software. And that was sort of a big aha for me. That we were thinking about patients so much as passive recipients of care and passive participants in trials, and it wasn't just something that was arguably disrespectful, but was just a huge a missed opportunity and untapped resource. And so I got really interested in what patients could do if we built them proper tools to ask better questions and track information and be collaborators in their care. So I spent a bunch of years at Google, had an amazing time, great learning experience, got some really good things done. And I started realizing something in the last few years of my tenure there, that there was something important missing from the toolkit that I had, that I was using. And the way I might characterize that now, with hindsight, is that we think, and this is I think where a lot of us currently are, and where we might, an era that we might be just starting to leave behind, and that is that we create static documents, either literally or metaphorically, and what we want the truth to be is that for every patient and every information need that she has, we want to create the ideal document, and we want to be able to point her to that, or give him a handout that includes that information, and we want that to be the information that's patient-facing, and that will suffice to give people the context they need to know when to go to the doctor, when to ask questions, et cetera. But that word static is more than just sort of a colloquial one. It turns out that all of us, when we experience health issues ourselves or with our loved ones, we realize that those pages don't come close to the specific and personal context about the subtype, the rare subtype that we happen to have of our disease, the complication that happens to be bothering us the most, the side effect that we're most afraid of, the caregiver duties that we have on top of our patient duties. And so those static pages were becoming more and more archaic in my view. And I learned about what communities like ACOR were doing, and quite literally, as I was working on search at Google and trying to make health search work better, I learned that there were all these communities in silos, like Gilles was describing, that weren't accessible to the world's dominant search engine, Google, because they're private communities. And robots.txt, for you nerds out there, said, "No thanks, don't crawl us. This is private stuff." And so I was looking forward to meeting Gilles when the opportunity arose, and also noticed that for example, user-centered healthcare had a total of 6 hits on Google, and that just didn't seem right.
Just about the same time, I started to really pay attention to the fact that those amazing conversations were always hidden behind walls, and that none of the conversations were crawlable, so you couldn't find. Our system was basically unknown to Google and to all the search engines. And I looked into tens of thousands of online communities that were similar, each one of them hidden behind a wall, and started to look into the issue of the deep web, which is about 50 times bigger than what is crawlable. And I said, I have to go and speak with those people at Google. Maybe we can do something together. So just as Ronnie was looking for me, I was looking for him. And we started to have some interesting conversations about what kind of work could be done together to scale the work that we had done at ACOR, and at the same time to help improve the quality of searches related to healthcare.
So we hired Gilles as a consultant at Google, and thousands of conversations later, not exactly according to plan, I left Google to join Gilles on the next chapter. That was about 2 years ago. And what we're trying to do, I'll give you a really cursory tour of what Smart Patients looks like. The goal is to build something hopefully that will remain extraordinarily simple. A community for people dealing with cancer initially, and we've just started to do some work outside of oncology with other complex diseases. Happy to share more in the Q&A. And the idea that's shown here, and these are de-identified, realistic, but not actual conversations in this slide. But what's shown here is a hypothetical person named Jack, who has lung cancer with bone mets. And Jack sees in his conversation feed a conversation about lung cancer, and if it's projecting well enough, it's a pretty sophisticated conversation and very realistic one. But he also sees a conversation about someone dealing with bone mets who doesn't happen to have lung cancer. Gilles talked about these silos, and that's, I think, one of the most interesting opportunities and challenges in front of us. Medicine is among the most siloed fields in the world, I suspect. You go to a gastroenterologist, you're probably going to get a gastroenterological diagnosis or offered a gastroenterological procedure or treatment. You go to an ENT doc, ditto. There's a lot of understandable biases that are built into that, just based on what we're exposed to. And what we've seen most recently are the things that we're going to think about most. And that, of course, works often and also doesn't work often. So the system that we're building, the Smart Patient System, probably the most important aspect of its design is that someone with lung cancer is in the lung cancer community. Someone with kidney cancer is in the kidney cancer community. But depending on the conversation, in this example, Jack has bone mets, and he's shared that with us. And so this conversation about bone mets that happened to have started in a kidney cancer community is shared with Jack, so he can learn from it, potentially participate in it. And this can be done, and there are some really smart things about this, and some of this is really simple. And the idea is that if you go back, probably the most interesting or useful slide for me is this one. What you have here is a bunch of micro experts. And so when one conversation starts in our system of communities, you can't predict who are going to be the most useful contributors to that. It should be, and generally is, the people who happen to be most expert in that particular issue. So how do you deal with making a decision, your contribution to that decision with your clinicians about lung cancer in the context of this mutation when you've already failed this drug? How do you deal with being a caregiver for someone who not only has diagnosis X, but also complication Y, and when your family situation is as follows? And that kind of wisdom, you can't always predict where it comes from. Obviously, there's some things that you can't predict, and you can't simply do something as coarse as putting everyone in one big space and hoping the right things happen. But as we start to realize how much each of us, researcher, clinician, and patient, and I should have explained earlier, when we say patient, really what we should be saying is patient or caregiver. Our system doesn't really distinguish between the two, and we have just about as many caregivers in our communities as patients. That each of those are potentially equal contributors to any given problem solution. And we need systems that both respect that and facilitate that.
Let me give one more example of the kind of conversation that we've found really amazing. In some communities where you have quite a few experts discussing all the time, they basically build a matrix of available treatments, and they constantly look into what are the experimental treatments in phase 1, phase 2 trials, and think about what kind of treatment should I get today in order to make sure that I'll be able to get the next generation if my treatment today fails. And this is the kind of thinking that I've never seen an oncologist give to the patients. I mean, those groups of patients are really advanced. This slide reminded me of something. Yes, this one, because those are really two conversations that take place all the time. In '98, Intel had the Internet Health Day with lots of doctors, lots of healthcare professionals, and lots of professionals, corporate people. And I talked there, and I said, I'm going to say something that some of you may find disturbing, but what we have built is a new form of peer-reviewed publication. And half of the doctors in the room just stand up and screamed and left because they just could not accept. But I think that what I said was basically correct. It's very rare that if somebody says something stupid, within an hour, 2, 3 people are not going to come back and say, what you said doesn't make any sense. Can you please provide the references? I did my research, and this is what I found in PubMed, and it doesn't jive with what you've just said.
Last comment, and then we're really excited to talk to you guys. One thing that you might notice on the screenshot there is a link on the bottom of the left nav to clinical trials. And just to give you a sense of both how we're trying to approach product development and the reality of what so many smart patients are thinking about these days, is that when we built our first couple of versions of this system 2 years ago, the feedback that we got from the cancer communities that we were first working with included a really common theme. This is very good so far. You're missing something huge. We're sick cancer patients. We're motivated. We're talking about clinical trials all the time. Unfortunately, for many of us, there weren't any, or there aren't any longer approved therapies that are available to us because we failed them already, if there were any. And so we need you to build something for us that's more human-friendly than clinicaltrials.gov, and which is the sort of the canonical US-based trial search engine. And first, we tried to convince them that that wasn't our focus, and that clinicaltrials.gov, isn't wonderful, but it does the job. And they insisted, said, no, we need something, and we need something that flows, that works in the workflow of our conversations. And so the first big detour that we took based on sort of our iterative process was building a clinical trial search engine whose most important feature is that you can find a trial and start a conversation about it. And that's, again, to many groups of clinicians and or researchers, hearing, first of all, that lots of users of clinicaltrials.gov are patients is surprising and news and potentially even concerning. And that's reality today, and it's certainly time that we built for that reality and took advantage of it.
Let me add one more thing. Those patients have discovered quite a long time ago that knowledge, you can't get knowledge just by getting information. Information has to be put in context. And the only way you can put information in context is through the conversations that those people are having with one another. And there is so much richness in the text that you have in there. It always, whenever I read one of those, it reminds me that there is no soul in big data. The soul is in the conversations that humans are having. And if medicine focus entirely on big data, it's going to miss all the soul that comes with human beings.
Let's talk.
Thank you so much. And we want to open up the floor to questions, but not before we give just a little bit of acknowledgement to all of those who are joining us from around the world tonight. We have a very diverse audience, which I'm happy to report that we've got people checking in from Australia, Toronto, Minnesota in a blizzard, Vancouver. Also, shout outs to Chronic Meg, Mark Hamill, Annette McKimmon. And so one of the questions that I want to give you guys from Twitter, and then we'll throw it to the audience, because I'd actually like to hear even some responses from the students with this, is what you're talking about very much breaks down the model. And we've got this question from Courage Sings about what's the best way to break down that traditional hierarchy of doctors know best and get patients involved?
I don't know. It's a really hard one. So as the token doctor, I'll give it a shot. I think the best that we're going to do is a gradual shift. This is a deep cultural change, and you can't prescribe the cultural changes. So I think we're going to see, it's already clear that that today's cohort of medical students are very different than my cohort, which wasn't that, that was only longer ago than I thought, 15, 20 years ago. I think one of the keys is that we have people that we have clinicians now that grew up with social media, which itself I think is a subtly and disruptively, a subtle disruptive equalizer of status, including in the medical world. I think what we're seeing, the biggest evidence of that are tweet chats. And patients, researchers, clinicians, anonymous people, they've all got the same seat at the table in some amazing conversations. And the rules there, which are both explicit and implicit, I think are starting to change that. But it's going to take the same slow, painful processes with some patients having the courage to ask questions that they aren't sure if the doctor really wants to hear. Some doctors having the courage to take an extra 90 seconds worrying that it might turn into 9 minutes with a question that could be a Pandora's box or could be the most important question they asked that day, and conversations like this one.
I think that one of the ways you can probably accelerate the change is to invite as many doctors as you can in those communities. The communities exist with or without the doctors. And only when doctors join those communities can they understand the incredible value that those communities have. They make much better patients.
Right.
And better patients are better able to communicate with doctors. So, I mean, in reality, those communities are of true benefit to healthcare professionals. And as long as they try to avoid them and think that those communities don't exist, they're really missing something.
Do you think that actually engaging with those communities provides perhaps a little bit more empirical knowledge that the communities have knowledge to offer instead of it just being anecdotal?
Well, so I have a few anecdotal elements that help me to say that doctors who join those communities, especially when it's for rare diseases, are going to be much more successful doctors than those who don't join. If you are a specialist in a rare disease and you join a community, you're going to be a better doctor. Your practice is going to work a lot better. Your income is going to be bigger. If you are a scientist and you want to run trials, it's going to be much easier for you to find patients.
And let me counter that, even though I rarely disagree with you, Gilles. That was a joke.
Can I repeat this in the office?
While there's certainly going to be cases, for example, with some very rare diseases and some unusual clinicians, most clinicians don't and won't have the time and the personality to really, let's just stick with time to join these communities. But I think it's worth reflecting on a trend. So maybe 15 years ago, we as clinicians were talking about, I'll be a little bit clean, and we'd say, oh crap, this patient just walked in with a bunch of printouts from WebMD or wherever, and we're almost over that. And now we understand that the internet is ubiquitous, and that's sometimes a bad thing and sometimes a great thing. And now it's a tool that we all have, and the question is, how do we use that tool to our collective advantage? And I think we're just about at that same point now with, instead of just these static pages, with these people looking at these static pages and talking to each other, I think we're just about at that point where we're seeing some clinicians start to say, of course, there's many who are saying like, oh God, I'm seeing a patient, or I might be seeing a patient, and who knows what they learned from a bunch of other crazy people online. And then we're just starting to see people talking about, there's actually some benefits here too. How can we make this work really well?
Nice. So let's open it up to the audience, please.
So there's insurmountable values in a broad participation of the conversations and a broader community. Do you do any measurable analytical metrics on the dynamics of these conversations, either peer-to-peer, patients to caregivers, or professional to professional conversation leading to quality of knowledge, like a scoring system, one example?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, and good to see you. A tiny bit. So the most straightforward answer is we're a small team working like mad, and we haven't had to do that yet. So we've only done a tiny bit of it because we're working so hard, making the nuts and bolts work better and better for the end users. But we're just starting to do a little bit of that. Mostly what we have right now is a whole bunch of wonderful anecdotal data. But we're absolutely investing in part of our infrastructure that can start to measure these things and understand the dynamics of, for example, what's most important for someone who's newly diagnosed with something that is or may appear to be life-threatening. What kind of dynamics are most useful to them? What makes patients and caregivers different? How do they interact with each other, both when something seems successful and not successful? What does successful mean? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of fascinating questions, both on the social science and on the sort of more geeky or network science side. So really, we're beginning to ask those questions, but nothing that would withstand anything like peer review quite yet. But I hope we get there.
Hi, so we started today talking about being tired, and I know that clinicians are often exhausted by these sorts of things, or maybe just tired in general from kind of, general occupational hazard. But I'm wondering if on sites like yours, if you've noticed how, let's say, micro experts might experience fatigue. Particularly in cases, let's say, where it was maybe a serious thing like a cancer diagnosis, they're participating a lot. When they sort of feel that they are better, do they stick around? Do they leave? How do you get them to stay engaging? And how do they manage those conversations in that sense?
Sure. So we don't do anything to keep them engaged. People remain engaged once they are members of those communities and that they see that their input is of value to others. They remain part of the communities for years. We have many people that have remained there even after their loved one has passed away. And they keep on providing advice to people. Another form of tiredness that I thought you may ask about is repeated questions. And we thought we were very smart and that we were going to help people by building a system, basically a new form of FAQ so they wouldn't have to repeat the answers. And they've told us in no uncertain way that this is a terrible mistake. We want to keep on answering questions. It's very good for us. It forces us to keep on looking into what has been published since we answered the question last. Mm-hmm. And so it's one of the great ways for us to remain at the forefront of knowledge. That was really one of the best discoveries of the last couple of years for me.
And yeah, we have more questions here, Sarah.
We are in the medical technology, and I think this is the best time for some of the physicians to get out of the white horse. I don't know if you know what I mean. Time to get close to earth. Let's put it that way. I know we live in California that we don't suffer electrical fails. I'm a physical therapist, and I treat people that I need the films in front of them. I don't need the CDs. And everybody wants to go paperless. How do you see a spine with scoliosis, people mention scoliosis, when you have to teach the patient and the caretaker, this is the way you're supposed to be sitting. Look at your x-ray. So it is a big confusion. I mean, it's a big technology. In other words, it's not everything now, like you were saying. We have to come down a little bit down and really take care of this. Who is this in the center of all of this thing? It's the patient. And many, many times the patient is a 7-year-old kid who knows a lot about the technology, and the parent doesn't know about the technology. You see,
Sure.
there's a big conflict going on in there. But hey, here's the film. You can see now through. You can feel it. You can see it. That's my comment for today.
And actually, I'd like to piggyback off of that with a question from Twitter that comes in from Dr. Kyra Babinet, who is asking about this patient-centered concept. And indeed, we have patients who are, all along the spectrum, but putting them at the center of healthcare will shape how they're treated, obviously. But what's the tipping point to make patient-centered care the overarching model for healthcare in general?
Hi, Kyra. Let me briefly answer a different question first, which is the one I thought maybe was going to get asked, which is, what about patients who don't want to be at the center of their care? And I think that's an important one to remind ourselves about, especially those of us who are always in kind of a little bit on the edge of change. I think what we're talking about here should always be clarified or thought of as giving people the choice to be as much at the center as they want. Some people's reaction to some of the kinds of work that we're talking about here is, well, wait a second, actually, this is totally overwhelming. I don't get it. I'm not sure I want to get it. I trust my wife, my son, my clinician, my physical therapist, and I just want them to tell me what to do. That's totally okay. To me, it's part of the whole continuum of informed consent. So you need to know that you need to know that you have some responsibility. You can delegate as much of it as you'd like. So we're not. I don't think anyone should be forced to be more responsible more responsible for learning everything about their illness than they're ready for. Tipping point. I think that the tipping point for most of what we refer to as patient-centeredness is going to be when it becomes clear to most physicians that it makes their job easier to live in a more patient-centered system. So, for example, perhaps this might be one example, that if these kinds of tools and approaches and philosophies make patients show up to their appointments more often and with more clearly delineated questions, that might actually make the doctor's job easier.
Right.
If patients help other patients stick with their treatment regimens after asking questions to make sure that they understand the treatment regimens, that makes doctors more effective potentially. So I don't know what the formula is for making that happen in terms of making doctors' jobs either easier and/or their work more effective. But I think that that's required for this to go mainstream, if you will.
And I'll give this to sort of both of you, unless you want to piggyback right
Sure.
off of that. Go ahead.
So I think this is really, it's a big issue of the wrong perspective. Doctors should all take a class given by an architect about a class on perspective, so that they can visually see that when we say it's an issue of perspective, what happens when you look into the same thing from this point or that point. It's not that it's reversed, it's different. And unless you learn to look into both directions, both points of view, both different perspectives, you cannot understand what it is to be a patient. So doctors see patients 5 minutes, 10 minutes, every 3 months. And because that's what their life is. They think that to be a patient is just, I'm going to see the patient, the doctor, and I'm a patient 7 minutes every 3 months. That's not the case. When you have cancer or a chronic disease, you're a patient 24/7. And
Have anything.
sure. And doctors are unaware that, all this time, the 99.9% of the time where they are not with the patients deal with medicine. It's a different form of medicine.
I'm a state-certified medical interpreter. started doing this, my ex-husband was a Stanford doctor. And so I feel like I've been involved in medicine practically my whole life. And now I find that at this point in my life, I'm kind of fighting for my patients that I interpret for. Because the doctor gets there, he's doing something else, he's on the computer, he's on the phone, and then he tells the patient, I'll see you in 3 months. Hello. So I go, wait a minute. This guy drove from Salinas, he has a bad back, he's been burned, you made him a drug addict, in 7 years he's been coming to your pain clinic, and now you want to tell him, I'll see you in 3 months, every 3 months? Yeah. What kind of medicine is that?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
unfortunately, talking about suspending conversations and having to continue them later, that's exactly what we're going to have to do here. But I thank you all for joining us. I thank everyone from Twitter. We still have questions that we were not able to get to from Meredith Gould and Annette McKinnon, which we'll try to have those perhaps later for discussion. And so thank you, Ronnie and Gilles, for joining us, and look forward to some announcements from Medicine X coming at you soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight for this class on leveraging social relationships in patient engagement with Dr. Ronnie Zeiger and Mr. Gilles Friedman, with our guest moderator and e-patient advisor, Sarah Kucharski. Please also remember to join us again next week, Thursday, February 27th, with guest speakers David Goldsmith and Devin Gross, who will speak on the topic of using triggers for behavior change. Stanford Medicine X e-patient scholar Christopher Snyder will moderate the discussion.